This is how to make a clay empty head pot, inspired by the Moai sculptures of Easter Island. So here you can see an example that I've made, and you can see that it's called empty head for a very good reason. It's hollow on the inside, and it can become a little pot or a desk tidy. You potentially could make it ever so slightly smaller, and it could even be a good egg cup holder. Okay, so placing that to one side, first thing that we need to do is when we get our clay, we need to what's called wedge it. So we need to wedge the clay. And what that means is you're holding it in one hand and you're going to be squashing it with what we call the sort of heel of your palm here, this part. So not using your fingertips, but using this part to try to squash it, bang it together, okay, like so. Now, this part is really, really important, and you need to take at least 5 minutes doing the wedging of the clay. All right, so I suggest you pause the video so that everybody can wedge their clay for a good 5 minutes, and then once you're done and it's looking like a really good sort of quite smooth sphere, then you can come back at this stage. So I'm going to take a piece of clay that I have already wedged for 5 minutes. So this piece I've already wedged for 5 minutes. And we're going to use a technique called either a pinch pot, or sometimes it's known as a thumb pot. So we would need to get our clay into as round a shape as possible. It doesn't need to be too smooth, but we want it to be a sphere. And then finding the middle of the sphere, we're going to use our thumb, and we're just going to start to gently press into the clay. Okay, so you'll be able to press about that far, and then what I want you to do is with your thumb and your index finger, your first finger, I want you to start to pinch and turn the pot. Each time I want you to push a little bit deeper with your thumb and pinch the walls of your pot to make them a bit thinner. So we're not pinching really hard, we're just gently pinching and turning. So each time we're turning it around like so. And you'd be surprised that fairly soon you start to get towards the bottom of the pot with your thumb. That's really important when we're making a sculpture, that we make it hollow. And the reason for that is that clay, if it's too thick, it won't fire very well. So the chances are that in the kiln it will explode. So general rule is that you wouldn't ever leave any parts of a clay sculpture thicker than, well, at maximum probably about 1 centimetre. Okay, if it's thicker than that, the chances are inside it's going to have air bubbles. And air bubbles are a big problem when you're firing the clay in the kiln. So as I've been talking, hopefully you've been watching, I've just been continuing that process, and gradually my pot is hollowing out and my walls are getting thinner. I'm just going to take it really slowly so that I don't accidentally stretch one part of the wall, and you can see here that naturally it'll start to have little cracks on the top. That's fine, but we don't want to overdo it. We don't want it to become too cracked and dry. So the reason that air bubbles are a problem is that air heats up when it goes in the kiln. Of course it does, like everything in the kiln. And what air does when it heats up is it expands, and it wants to escape from wherever it's trapped. And eventually it will escape, but it'll do so by basically exploding your sculpture, and it'll potentially explode everybody else's around it as well. So that's why we can't just, for example, make a solid head. It needs to be hollow. Now, whether you choose to have it as an empty brain, or you want to do your sculpture the other way up and have the head this way with the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and underneath is hollow, So it's just a sculpture rather than it also becoming a pot that you could put things into. That's entirely your choice, okay? So at this stage, we've made a very, very simple pinch pot, or a thumb pot as they're called. And we're trying to be really careful and make sure that the thickness of the walls stays the same all the way round, okay? And that all comes from just gentle pinching between the thumb and the finger and turning, okay? We want to make sure that the base, so the bottom part, isn't too thick. So we need to have made sure that basically we've reached our whole thumb inside, and that should just be about the right thickness. And we want to make sure that we haven't pulled and stretched any of the walls so that they're sort of turning out on themselves. We ideally want them turning in slightly. Okay, so that is the first step, and that's the kind of basic process of making a pinch pot or a thumb pot.